What's happening, feeshin friends? I know it's been a minute since our last MLF, but worry not, I have not forgotten. Now, as a reminder, we are going to talk about the MLF Summit Selects and the Summit Cup. So if you haven't watched those, there will be spoilers. This is your chance to turn away now. But for those of you still with me, if you haven't watched the Summit Select Championship, Jordan Lee ended up winning that. Dude's an absolute hammer. He's going to be a stud. He already is a stud. He's going to be a stud for a while. Trust me. So moving up to the Summit Cup, the anglers are fishing some lakes up in Maine. I think they start out at Great Pond. And of course, like a lot of the northern lakes, it's a very clear, smallmouth rich lake. So to me, it wasn't any surprise that Aaron Martins won the first elimination round. And any guesses how he did it? A whole lot of drop shotting and using electronics. Dude's a stud at that. Now, I know a lot of the bank anglers out there watching are thinking, Debo, how's this video going to benefit me? I don't have a boat or electronics, but trust me, bear with me. Now, just because he had the drop shot and electronics didn't mean he could just turn it on, find a fish, and catch it. He was very specific in saying that he had to find the balls of bait and follow the bait to be able to catch those smallmouth. Now, for the combo he was using, he said he was using 10-pound braid to a 6 or 7-pound fluorocarbon leader. He was using the RoboWorm Sculpin, which looks just a little bit different than the regular RoboWorm, and a little 4-inch RoboWorm just like that. Now, when it comes to colors of this, it's no surprise he was using Aaron's Magic, Morning Dawn, and MM3. 3 very good colors for clear water. I'm gonna have to try those because I got some RoboWorms for the old drop shot rig. Now, normally when you see anglers using the drop shot offshore, it's like a spot and stock method, right? You know, they're using their electronics, they find a fish, they drop the drop shot, you know, right in front of the transducer, right in front of the trolling motor where it's seeing that fish, jig it, you know, wait for that fish, and boom, they've got it. But it was very interesting. He used a little bit different approach some of the time. Now, he used that approach too, but he did something a little different. He brought up a tactic called penduluming the bait, or, you know, letting the bait pendulum to keep it in the strike zone longer. And when I heard that, I was, you know, kind of taken back because I'm like, well, you know, as a guy that flips and pitches a lot, letting the bait pendulum is bad. You know, if those bass are tight to cover, you know, it's a bluebird day and they're stuck, you know, under a tree on that cover, they're going to be nose to it. So if I flip a jig in there and it hits the water, I want it to fall straight down on slack line so it essentially hits that fish in the nose. So if it's having, you know, a real neutral day, doesn't really want to eat, if it sees something there, it's going to grab it. It's not going to, you know, chase it 2, 3, 4 feet away. If I flip that jig in, engage my reel, as soon as it hits the water, that bait is going to pendulum away. It's never going to get to that fish right here, so I want to let it fall on slack line. But he was using that to his advantage. He said that he was targeting fish 25 to 30 feet of water. So he would cast it out and cover water with it, let that bait fall a little bit, and then he would close his bail and let it swing right in that 25 to 30 feet of water. And he was essentially covering water that way instead of just dropping it straight down, bringing it up, you know, running around, dropping it straight down, bringing it up. He was using a 2-prong approach. He was watching his electronics, but he was also casting out and covering water. So I thought that was pretty cool. I've never really heard of guys doing that with a drop shot. Good way to cover water and spot and stock fish. I was extremely excited about Aaron's win because he brought up something in the press conference that made me jump off the sofa. Remember how I said he was fishing a 6 to 7-pound leader? He said he wished he had 5-pound because, and I quote, "I wished I had a 5-pound leader, not because the fish can see it, but because it makes the bait move more freely." I was like, oh, feeshin friends, we just talked about this, and it makes complete sense. If you were throwing a drop shot on 20-pound fluorocarbon, you know how it's real stiff, almost feels like wire? That drop shot's not going to move real freely, you know, with a thick, hard, heavy line. Change to something like this, and this is just 6-pound line. Look at that. I mean, that's real wimpy, noodly. If you drop down to 5, it's going to be even more. It's really going to accentuate that lure's movement. You know, as you're just barely twitching it, those vibrations are going to carry through the rod and the line a lot easier on real light stuff instead of real heavy, thick wire type line. Now, in the second elimination round, Jacob Wheeler took the victory. And again, he said it was all about finding the bait. It was slow, it was slow, it was slow. Then he'd find a big, huge ball of bait, and he would just nail him. You know, he said time was very essential because, you know, it'd be a 30-second to, you know, 3, 4, 5-minute flurry. So if he was getting 2-minute penalties, there's a good chance that those fish would have completely shut off. So he said he fished very careful and made use of those flurries and those little schools when he got on them. Now, as for the baits, he said that he stuck to a gray shad color type imitation on the drop shot, something like a RoboWorm, you know, some other type of similar shad bait. But he also used a little 4-inch wacky rig stick bait. Got a little jig head on there. You've seen me use that, right? So this is where I'm talking to you bank anglers. If you have a boat and electronics, you can completely mimic that. As a bank angler, you're thinking, well, I can't go out and chase the bait. I'm, you know, fishing from the bank. What do I do? Well, the thing is, there's always going to be native fish that are living up shallow. So what that means for you is find the bait and you can find the fish, right? Largemouth bass are predators, so if you can find those bushes that are holding, baby bluegills or minnows, or, a little shad population in the corner, little back corner pocket of the lake that you're fishing. Don't waste time fishing big open water, just any random spot. If you know those bass are feeding on bait, follow the bait, find the pockets, the back channels. Might be a little harder to get to, but it's going to be worth it. And a couple guys proved this throughout the show. Andy Montgomery, for example, he moved on. He didn't win his round, but he moved on fishing shallow. I think in the first round, he had every single fish, pitching and flipping docks with a jig. Everybody else was out fishing deep. He stuck to his game plan, fish shallow, and he was still catching fish. The same goes for Gary Klein. He won the round 3 elimination, but he did it fishing all shallow. Now what's funny is he's one of the founders of MLF. He talked about, making one of the first trophies that sat in his car on the ride. He's one of the founders. He had never even won a single round. Not, a full cup or a full select. He'd never even won one round, but he stuck with it and finally won. Now after he won in the press conference, he really stressed the importance of fishing very shallow to catch all of his fish. I think he said less than 3 or 4 feet of water, he caught every single fish to win. So for all you bank anglers, that should be encouraging. You just have to know where to find them. Now for his combo, he said he was using 6-pound fluorocarbon, again, with that little wacky weighted stick bait with a little weighted jig head. He uses the 1/16. That's usually what I go to. And it just really emphasizes that bait's motion. Normally you throw out a stick bait and it's just a very subtle wobble on the way down when there's no weight. But when you wacky rig it and add a little bit of weight to that, it really makes those tails flutter on the way down. You can cover a little bit more water too, but in that clear water, like he was saying, you could just stay way off, use your boat, stay way off them and cast up there and let that bait do the work. You're not doing anything crazy. You're letting the clear water and the bait do the work. Now he also said that letting that bait fall on slack line was key, and that's something that new anglers struggle with. What is a slack line approach? And really that just means that when you cast your bait out, you're letting it sink uninterrupted by you or your reel or your rod. You're just letting that bait fall on slack line. Your line's kind of drooped. It's not tight. You're not moving the bait. It's just falling on slack line, doing its own thing. He said that was key. And I've completely noticed that too. There's days where if you're moving the bait or doing anything, fudging around with it, sometimes you'll take up your line on your reel and just kind of spin it. Well, that's pulling the bait. So if you let that bait fall on slack line, sometimes that can make all the difference. And that kind of ties into the whole pendulum deal. A lot of guys, no matter what, they'll cast out and engage their reel right away. Now, if you're fishing 8, 9, 10 feet of water and that bait's falling, it's just going to pendulum away. It's not going to go straight down on slack line where you wanted it to. And for a lot of folks, that has to do with the weight. I know a lot of newer anglers that start out don't want to use real heavy weights. But if you take like a little 1/4 ounce jig and cast it out there, if you just leave that open, sometimes it'll fluff up, it doesn't have enough weight to pull that down if there's wind and waves or whatever. So as a newer angler, if you're having trouble with that, letting that bait fall on slack line, sometimes you just need to move up in weight. Now sometimes weight isn't the issue, but like Gary Klein was using, he fished it on a spinning rig the whole time, every single one off the spinning rig with a little 1/16 ounce jig, a little 4-inch stick bait. So it's really just all about training your mind that as soon as you cast it out, leave that bail open, let it pull line and just fall natural. It looks real helpless, nothing weird and erratic as you're moving or reeling it, just falls real slow and nice. So that's it, Feeshin' Friends. The 2 big things that I took away from watching the first 3 elimination rounds of the Summit Cup are, there's always multiple ways to catch fish. Some guys were doing it out deep, some guys were doing it up shallow. Gary Klein, Andy Montgomery, fishing shallow. Other guys like Brent Ayler, Mike Iaconelli, of course Aaron Martins, they did it fishing deep. So you can always formulate the game plan. There's often multiple ways to catch the fish and locate them. The second big thing was, again, that lure presentation, whether it's dropping down to a lighter line to make that bait more lifelike, or sometimes it's the way you present the bait. Like Gary Klein said, he had to stay far away. If he was right up on those little docks and platforms that he was fishing, in that clear water, the fish are going to see him. So he stayed way away, made long casts, and let the lure do all the work. He wasn't imparting a bunch of action. He was just letting this fall on slack line, and it did all the work for him. So those are the 2 big takeaways for me, but of course I want to hear from all of you. So if you watched the MLF Selects or the Summit Cup, let me know what you picked up. If you didn't watch them at all, that's fine. I'd still like to hear from you. Let me know if there's ever a time where you've noticed a certain way that you've presented the bait or a certain way that you've located fish that has completely helped you. Share it. Other Feeshin' Friends might learn, and that's what it's all about. Hopefully we'll get some good conversations going down in the comments. I always appreciate that. But again, I appreciate all of you very much. I appreciate the support. It is late. I got to get going to bed. So until next time.